Well, we started off week one was talking about the need for sexual formation. So part of sexual formation is having a vision for who God has called us to be as sexual beings. And so we can't grow in sexual discipleship if we don't have an understanding of what that frame is, who we called to be. So that's my desire this morning as well. Theology of sexuality is not giving you the practical how-tos of sex, but more of giving you that vision of what God has called sex to be. And so it starts with the question, what is the purpose of sex? And again, we can give many different answers here, but often we don't think about this in terms of a kingdom perspective or theological perspectives. But spending time to even contemplate of the act of sex, like why did God design the act of sex the way he designed it? Where even if we reduce sex just to baby making, and I would argue that it's more than that, but even if we reduce it to just baby making, like why did God design it that way? Like he's an infinite God. There's many other ways in which we can make babies. Like we can pull out a piece of hair and mix it together. Like there are other ways in which babies can be made. Why did God choose this way in which to procreate? So I think that's good, again, for us to reflect on, to contemplate. Here's my take. And so part of the sex act reflects the divine unity. And so, big picture, sex is about oneness. And so God is Father, Son, and Spirit, and yet one. In the sex act, the two become one. Males are still males and females are still females, but somehow in this act they become one, reflecting that divine unity. And as Tom was making the point this morning, there's a distinction there, but yet still a unity. So we don't give up who we are just because we're united with each other. So again, our uniqueness, our distinctions remain, but yet somehow we're interwoven into one. And so again, you have the Father, the Son, the Spirit. They're distinct and yet one. I believe this is also a picture of relational unity. And so as we move out on the relational level, so whether we're talking marriage, whether we're talking family, whether we're talking community, society, what does it look like to be unified? The sex act gives us a picture of here's what it looks like to be unified. Again, you can be distinct and yet be one. That oneness is not sameness. And so whatever unity looks like, God has given us a concrete example of here's what unity looks like. That you can be joined in a powerful, united way, and yet still remain your distinctions. There's also the fancy phrase, ontological oneness. And so in as much as we talk about a reflection of oneness, a picture of oneness, in some abstract way, there's an ontological oneness that takes place as well. Again, a fancy phrase is simply saying there's a real substantive, actual oneness that takes place. So it's not just in the abstract that when you join your bodies with someone, there's an actual oneness, unity that's taking place. And so this is Paul in 1 Corinthians 6, says, don't be joined to a prostitute because you become one body with her. We can see this in positive, we can see this in a negative. That certainly in consummating a marriage, consummating a relationship, there's a powerful bonding that takes place. And so there's a reason that breaking up, if you've not been sexually active, is a lot easier than breaking up if you have been sexually active. If you've been sexually active, there's a bonding that takes place that's hard to undo. And so in the positive, again, that helps to enrich the bond, husband and wife together. In the negative, now you're fellowshipping with something or someone that you're not intending to carry on a lifelong commitment with. And so now when that relationship comes to is needed in, there's now all this entanglement that's hard to then untangle. And so there's an ontological oneness that takes place. More practically, when we think about sex, we're probably not on a conscious level thinking about, hey, this is about oneness and here's the substantive oneness and the divine one. We're probably not thinking about sex in those terms. Often when we think practically, we're thinking about sex is for the purpose of intimacy, procreation, and pleasure. Some Christian traditions will emphasize the procreation aspect of it. Many will then have some combination of procreation and intimacy. Pleasure seems to be the aspect that seems most reluctant to accept, but I believe it has an honored place in the considerations as well. As a divine reflection, I believe intimacy, procreation, pleasure can be seen as God's truth, goodness, and beauty. And so we talk about making love and using that as a euphemism for sex. I believe that is accurate in the sense that sex act through intimacy, procreation, and pleasure get to reflect God's love through truth, goodness, and beauty. And so let's start with the path of truth. So truth is the path of intimate knowing. This is often what we think about in terms of just intimacy. Short definition of intimacy is allowing ourselves to be seen, to be known in the presence of another. And so that can be certainly physical intimacy, but social, emotional, mental, spiritual intimacy, allowing myself to be seen, to be known in the presence of another. And so in this way, I know the truth of who you are through intimacy. I see the truth of who you are. And so we're on the path of truth. Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived. That phrase there, yada, know, is an experiential knowing. So it's not just knowing about, it's knowing the fullness, the truth of who you are. In sexual expressions, this is often marked by a sense of curiosity, of wonder, of romance. A part of romance is pursuing who you are, pursuing your heart. I want to know who you are, so I'm romancing you in order to pursue your heart. We're all on the path of truth here. The path of goodness is then the path of creative action. The part of love provides what's needed. We can see this in Jesus' teaching in Matthew, that inasmuch as you do this to the least of these, you do also to me. And in that teaching, it was like, I didn't know when I was serving you and meeting your needs. It's like, yeah, even in those mundane things, you're meeting the needs of Christ. You're serving Christ. And so how much more can sex then be a vehicle of our love? Where we're meeting the various physical, emotional, mental, social, spiritual needs of our spouse. And so love is in action. And so sex gets to be an embodied way to love and meet the needs of our spouse. There's a sense where, again, it's easy to think about sex and procreation. We know that when we put bodies together, that the chance of procreation, creating new life, is there. And I believe that every act should be procreative in the sense that it is life-giving. And so as you're uniting yourself, it should be procreative in that you're walking away from that encounter filled up with more life. And this is where porn misses the mark, in that most encounters with porn, you're not walking away filled up with life. You feel used, dirty. It's not something that gives you life. But the sex act, our expressions of sex, should be creative action. It should be life-giving. And in the dance, it's often experienced as playfulness and a desire for variety. And so often talk about couples, the play of sex is part of that. But then the desire for variety, God is a God of variety. And so I like apples. But when you go to the store, there's not just one kind of apples. There's like several different kinds of apples. I looked it up on Wikipedia once. I think there's like 700 something different varieties of apples. And it's like, why all that variety? I think that's part of that creative nature and that God has put in us to express ourselves in a variety of different ways. And that's what comes out on this path of goodness, that we want to express ourselves in a variety of different ways. Then the path of beauty is a path of joy experienced. And so here, beauty is a gift from God to be joyed in its own right. And so this is kind of like the joy of watching a sunset or listening to good music, that we're not trying to figure out the properties of the sunset. We're not trying to, you may know music theory, but you don't need to know music theory in order to enjoy good music. There's a part of the beauty of those forms that you can simply enjoy in its own right. And there's a part of sexuality that includes that as well, that you simply get to enjoy the erotic pleasures for their own sake. And so the presence of God is a fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. There's a pleasure aspect to the sexual experience that can be enjoyed in its own right. Again, I don't think you will ever completely divorce it from the path of intimacy or the path of goodness, but there is a path to be joy in its own right. And so in some ways it's similar to the Trinity, where I may focus on the Spirit in one moment, but me focusing on the Spirit is not denying the Son, it's not denying the Father, even if my attention in that moment is focused on the Spirit, and vice versa. And so again, focusing on beauty, again, path in its own right, doesn't mean I'm neglecting the other path. Just a thought on sexual development. So you can see at the top here, these are the three paths that I just mentioned. So intimacy, playfulness, and pleasure. Those be the three paths. And depending on your personality, your sexual temperament, arousal, you may prefer one or some combination of these paths more than others. So helpful to remember in marriage that you may not have the same combination as your spouse. Back to that oneness that we talked about earlier, how do we make those differences work for us? But you may prefer one of these paths more so than others, which is fine, provided you are maturing. So part of maturity goes from a self-focus to relationship focus to a spiritually aware. So in self-focus, the sexual expression is just about me. Here's what I can get from this encounter. Relationship focus, now I'm making this connection with you as another human being and a unique human being. Spiritually aware is now I get to be aware of God's presence even in this sexual encounter. We're at the Brown's house and you had the practicing the presence of God, where in there he's a monk and like a kitchen worker and different things along those lines. But even in his menial tasks, he was able to practice the presence of God. And so if he's able to do that while washing dishes, can we also bring that into our sexual expressions? Can we also bring God present in our sexual expressions where, truth be told, God is already there? And so it's not that he's not there. How do we bring the presence of God even into our sexual expressions? As we do that, when we're fully aware of God, we're less likely to sin. Because it's hard to sin when you're in God's presence. So it's good to grow in spiritual maturity, sexual development here by growing in that spiritual awareness. Now, to be fair, we have to start at the self-focus. And so at some point, you need to learn how to possess your own body. So we can't jump over these stages. There's a place, a time period for you to be self-focused, simply to learn your own body and how to regulate that so that you can then give yourself as a gift to your spouse. But you shouldn't stay here. At some point, it needs to be more relational focus. Most couples, in my experience, are not even aware of spiritual awareness as part of their sexual dance. And so getting here at relationship focus is often a huge first step just to take. And then maybe later in life, other couples can move to the spiritually aware aspect of it. But I like putting it out there as a vision. So even if it takes a lifetime to get there, to know that that's still possible. A note on Eros. This is Love Month, and we often talk about Eros and Cupid, and we often think about Eros in terms of romantic sexual love. And I think Eros does include that, but are not limited to that. And so while Eros drives our desire to connect sexually, Eros is not just about a desire for sex per se. So again, that is that surge that you feel, that ache that you feel to connect sexually, that is part of Eros driving you in that direction. But Eros is best understood as a passionate desire to unite with all that is true, good, and beautiful in oneself, others, the world, and ultimately God himself. And so again, as we walk through those paths of truth, goodness, and beauty, your desire to connect, to be united with all that is true, good, and beautiful, that is Eros. That is that passionate desire. And so whether that is knowing oneself, whether that is connecting with others, whether that's in the world, whether that's ultimately with God himself, that is all of that Eros erotic desire. And I believe this reflects God's passionate desire, passionate love toward each of us, where it's not a still and static love that God loves us. He loves us with a passionate love, willing to send his son for us. And so Eros drives our desires for friendship. And so that desire to connect simply even with same-sex friends, that is part of Eros. Again, we don't generally think about it in those terms, but if Eros is about connecting with all that is true, good, and beautiful, then friendship is a part of that drive as well. A meaningful work and calling. And so that drive to even work long hours and have the creative pursuits for people joining the mission field and the like. There's something that's driving them. And I would say part of Eros is driving that desire to what is true, what is good, what is beautiful. I want to experience that. And now I'm willing to do what is necessary to move in that direction. Hobbies. These are our creative pursuits. And so whether that is drawing or writing or singing and want to express yourself in some creative way, that is part of Eros as well. There's some life force, some life energy surging in you that wants you to express yourself in certain ways. Learning something new. And so when you're geeking out on a particular topic, that geeking out that energy, that excitement is part of Eros. The desire to travel, to see new places, art, music, food, just enjoying the goodness of all of that. That is all part of Eros. And so I think we miss it when we limit Eros to just romance or just sexual expression, and we miss the fullness of what's available. And so remembering to keep Eros expansive frees us from the pressure to put all that passion and energy into concrete or overt sexual behaviors. Some of this we'll get into more next week as well. But when we put Eros all into sexual expressions, then, okay, what do I do with this urge? What do I do with this ache? When I remember that it's expansive, now I can express that life force in many different ways. It doesn't have to be all on the sex act itself. This is not replacing the sex act or the desire is there, but it's not putting all that pressure just on that overt behavior. So we're supposed to be good Christians, disciples of Christ. What should we even be cultivating Eros? And isn't it better to simply cultivate agape? Say, yes, it's both. That these are not in competition with each other. They actually work well together in harmony with each other. So Eros keeps life from being too serious and dull. And so there's something, again, whether it's geeking out or your hobbies or that falling in love, filling with another person, there's an excitement that comes with that. And so all of that is Eros. So it keeps life from being just one dry commitment, duty that actually fulfilling. So Eros makes life passionate and enjoyable. But agape keeps Eros from being too distorted into selfish or limited pursuits. And so if left on its own, Eros can become distorted. It can become very, very selfish if left on its own. So agape helps to keep it from that. But while agape elevates, corrects, transforms, enriches Eros, it doesn't deny or replace it. And so again, there's still a place for Eros. But agape is needed to elevate it, correct it, transform it, enrich it into its fullness. And so we're not, in order to become disciples of Christ, it's not having to give up Eros. It's not having to give up the erotic side of who we are. And this is where many Christians struggle. It's like, all right, to be a good Christian, I have to deny my erotic side. It's like, no, you just need to transform it. You just need to correct it. You need to enrich it. You need to elevate it. You don't have to deny that side of you in order to be a good Christian. So how do you use Eros? How do you use your erotic desires in service of love, in service of agape? This is the rule of life. And so wisely pursue unity in which the sex act represents. And so in my friendships, at work, at church, how do I pursue unity? Where I'm not demanding sameness. I'm not demanding that everyone does things the way that I do things, but I can practice unity by honoring your distinctions, but still finding that overarching aspect, principle. Tom was mentioning Christian values, worldview that's able to unite us in one body in Christ. And so again, the sex act represents that, but we're all called to pursue unity. Trying to figure out how to, all right, we're single mostly in this room, and so what practice can I do? We're doing a theology of sex, and so what practice can I do when we are single right now, reserving sex for marriage? We can practice the presence of God throughout our life. So if you're able to do that now when you're single, and again throughout life, and so while you're eating, while you're showering, while you're driving, like if you're able to practice the presence of God now, and then you're able to translate that into marriage as a whole, and then your sex life in particular, you'd be well on the way toward maturity. Again, I think there's still going to be a growth that has to take place. That even if it was possible to perfect that now, there's still going to be a learning once you get into marriage. So you still have to figure out, okay, how do we connect and be relationship focused? So you're not going to be able to jump just into the spiritual awareness, but you having some ground covered will certainly help in that way. And then finally, I will use my erotic desires in service of love. So again, part of discipleship is not denying who you are as erotic beings, but it is allowing who you are to be transformed into the service of love. And so how will I pursue those things that are true, those things that are good, those things that are beautiful, even now in my life, where I'm not limiting my erotic desires to just sexual expressions in explicit physical sense. I'm using my erotic desires in its fullness in service of love.
I agree with what you're saying, like with the rest, but I just cannot wrap my mind around when you're talking about love in the last slide with Matthew 25:40, because in that context, it explains about the judgment day.
Mm-hmm.
Regards, how does it, it's like, how does this relate to sex?
Yeah, it's taking the principle of Matthew 27, so obviously that's not directly talking about sexual experiences, but what can we learn from that? What's the least that we can do from that? The least that we can do from that is be intentional about the good acts that we do. And so is there a principle, is there a truth that we can glean from that can apply to sex as well? Again, the passage says, as we do even these little things, that's actually serving Christ. And so will you give your spouse even that hug? So it'll go more beyond that as well, but are you providing what is needed in that moment? Whatever that need is, are you providing what is needed to express love and to serve Christ as well?